Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of Hanging with Harley. And we have with us the man of the hour who needs no introduction. We are talking, of course, of Harley Schlanger. You can find him over at LaRoucheOrganization.com, LaRoucheOrganization.com, as well as SchillerInstitute.com, SchillerInstitute.com. And with that being said, Harley, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm better than Joe Biden, that's for sure.
That was an amazing debate, to say the least, and I think the Democratic factions are absolutely in panic mode, because now the question is where or who is going to be replacing Biden? Will it be the Californian psycho himself, the Patrick Bateman wannabe, the one and only Gavin Newsom? Will it be Hillary Clinton resurrected from the glue factory? Or will it be some other ilk tied to the Obama faction of the Democratic Party? It's going to be interesting to see all of this, Harley.
Well, I think beyond the question of the panic in the Democratic Party, because that's what the media is focused on.
Sure.
What about the panic in the population, seeing that we're on the verge of a possible war with Russia, and the president seems to have no idea where he is? And he's the one with the finger on the nuclear button. The obvious point here is that the real cause for panic is that it's clear that he's not the one in charge. So this brings up the question of who's calling the shots. And when you bring up the Obama network, well, we look at people like Blinken and Sullivan, but I think you have to go a little deeper and look at Susan Rice, look at Cass Sunstein, Samantha Power. You've got a crew of utopian neocons who come out of the University of Chicago, but who are committed to the most insane policy of challenging Russia and China militarily in order to protect a collapsing financial system. And so, you look at the Democrats chagrined and upset. Did they really think they could pull this off? I mean, have they not been watching Biden walking in the walls and talking to non-existent people and turning to shake hands with ghosts? I mean, we've all seen it. And the real question, I think Caitlin Johnstone asked this question: how come people aren't more concerned that this guy's the president now than that he's up for re-election in November?
Exactly correct, and that's the thing that people are starting to really concern themselves with. It's unbelievable, Harley.
Well, V, there's some interesting stuff going on in Europe now as a result of the European Union Parliament elections on June 9th, because the two most important powers in Europe, France and Germany, had the coalition government in Germany and the Macron government in France were smashed in those elections. Macron got only half the votes of the Marine Le Pen party. And in Germany, the Scholz, Green, Free Democratic coalition got just barely 30%. And the growth in new parties, or relatively new parties, the Alternative for Deutschland, the so-called right-wing nationalist party, they came in second. And then Sarah Wagenknecht, who comes out of the Communist Party from East Germany from some time ago, but is actually quite sensible, formed a new party 2-3 months before the election and came in ahead of the Free Democrats. Now, what we're seeing is all of a sudden, Macron, in panic, called for elections to the National Assembly because he didn't want to be a lame duck. And now it looks as though he's assuredly going to be a lame duck because his party has no chance of winning short of massive fraud on Sunday. And Macron yesterday, for the first time, remember, he was saying we've got to send French troops to Ukraine. We can't let Putin win. Yesterday, he said, maybe it's time to talk to Putin. And the same thing was said by Friedrich Merz, who's the head of the Christian Democrats. That's the standard conservative in Germany that came in first in the European Parliament vote. And Merz had been pro-Ukraine war all along. And yet he also said yesterday, maybe it's time to talk about putting an end to this war and talking to Putin. Now, this occurs after Putin put out his peace proposal the same day Zelensky ran this clown show in Switzerland. And the European leaders all said, this is just Putin nonsense. We're not going to even think about it. And yet now they're thinking about it because they can't win the war in Ukraine. If the U.S. is the leader in combating Russia and China, what do you think these guys were thinking watching Biden last night? So I think and then of course you have the Israel situation where Netanyahu's fighting against everyone, and his only allies are the complete psychotic lunatics of the far right, and not even forget the far right, the Zionist messianic psychopaths, Ben Gvir and Smotrich. So the West is in terrible shape. We have economic problems that are resolvable, but not the way it's being approached. And the motion toward an alternative financial system from the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Countries, OPEC, it's all moving away from the United States. So, just buckle your seatbelts. This is going to be a real rough ride over the next couple of months, but I'm optimistic that we're going to see a breakthrough away from war and away from depression. And let me add one other point. Lloyd Austin, after not having talked to anyone in Russia for over a year, well over a year, since March 2023, organized a call with the Russian Defense Minister Belousov. And for Austin to do that, he said, well, we just want to reestablish communication. He probably wanted to make sure that he wasn't about to get nuked.
Yeah. He wanted to make sure that he doesn't wind up glowing in the dark.
That's right. So I think that the situation is shifting dramatically. The problem is the lack of leadership in the West. And what we've been trying to do is to pull together networks around our International Peace Coalition, the Schiller Institute, around the idea of America should be joining the Belt and Road Initiative, should be joining the BRICS. There are all sorts of options, but it requires dumping the axioms and the rules that people have followed for the last 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right, exactly correct. And the West plays to that. They play to these old Cold War tropes, because they literally believe people are that stupid, Harley.
Well, I think they overestimated the power of the media for brainwashing.
Absolutely.
And I just gave a speech last weekend at a Schiller conference on the topic was the target of hybrid warfare is you, not the Russians. I mean, the Russians are targeted by NATO's hybrid warfare, but they're not going to convince Putin that he's irrelevant and losing. They're trying to convince people in the West that there's no option but to stay the course, to keep this leadership in power, to continue with the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, continue with the global South as a source of loot. And the problem is that because this global South is turning against that, turning toward the BRICS and alternative settlement system and so on, where are they going to go to get the loot to cover their huge debt? They're going to go at the American people and at the people of Europe. And we're already seeing a drop in living standards in Europe, a dramatic drop. In Germany, I can tell you the inflation in Germany continues to be high. Living here is very difficult now because you find for the first time, certain time by the end of the week, fruits and vegetables are not available in some of the markets in Berlin. So we're seeing the I guess you could say the coming together of the problems that they've been kicking down the road. But we're now down the road and hitting the problems, and we have worse than mediocrities in governments trying to solve them.
Yeah. There was a viral video that went of a young man, probably in his late 20s or mid 20s or so. He repurchased his Amazon grocery, his Walmart groceries, utilizing the Walmart application, and he went back and reordered what he ordered, back in 2022. And the 2022, the price that he paid out the door was $175. And in today's order, when he reordered the same items in 2024, Harley, it was $412.
Yeah. And yet we're told inflation is tapering.
Oh, it's tapering, all right. Yeah. It's tapering around our necks like a noose.
What's tapering is our bank accounts.
Yep, exactly correct. That's what's tapering.
And if you look at what the Congress is concerned about, bringing Netanyahu to speak, that this is the big deal for the Congress. Netanyahu may be out of office by then, given the rebellious mood of the people of Israel. And the people of Israel are not exactly sane. They still want to carry out a destructive war against Hamas, even though they're more sane military leaders are saying you can't kill an idea. We can't destroy Hamas militarily. And they're even starting to say things like the only way to deal with Hamas is to address some of the grievances that have led to Hamas's emergence. And of course, what that would mean is an end to occupation. It would mean an end to the colonialism that the Israelis have imposed on Palestine. They can't do that. They just can't do it because that's the inherent nature of a Zionist religious state. And now they've got a problem because they're running short of soldiers and they're trying to draft the Orthodox. And the court just ruled that the Orthodox can't use their presence in the yeshiva as an excuse. What's going to happen? You're going to have these enraged guys with the long black coats and hats demonstrating now. So that's just another example of a disintegration of the existing order.
Right.
And I think there is no better poster boy for that than Joe Biden last night.
Joe Biden was the perfect avatar of a dying American hegemon. I mean, you saw it. Trump absolutely savaged him in regards to his take on everything, basically, Harley. It was incredible to witness this. It's symbolic, I believe. I think the Joe Biden presidency is very symbolic of where we are as a country.
Well, with Trump, I wasn't so impressed with what he said. His looks were fairly impressive. When you saw Trump looking at Biden like, "Huh? What are you saying?" But the more important thing with Trump, and a lot of this is theatrics, but he did this interview last week and this podcast All In, where for the first time he said something extremely important on Ukraine, which is that he said that it was Biden's commitment to continue the eastward expansion of NATO, which caused the Russian reaction that led to this war. Now, why is that so important? Because the line from the West is that the war was unprovoked. If Donald Trump now gets into the front and says, look, NATO provoked the war, Biden provoked the war, the coup in 2014 provoked the war, the killing of the people in the Donbass provoked the war, that shatters the whole narrative that's been there for building the anti-Russia coalition. And if Trump starts with that, that's an extremely significant break. Yeah. Now, whether he will do that or not, I don't know. it really is going to require some thinking on his part and the people working with him on his campaign. But my advice to him would be double down on that and make the point that he was right as president to question the utility of staying in NATO.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Harley, what are some of the other things that are happening in Europe in terms of the population? Are they starting to rally around populism? Are they starting to rally around the fact that the people that rule and control them do not have their best interests in mind? And is the EU about to fracture? Are we going to see the end of the European Union?
I'll get to that in a second. Let me just take a slight detour. You know where that's happening? In Kenya, where the IMF tried to impose a new policy of increased taxes in a situation of high inflation and high unemployment. And tens of thousands of young people went out into the streets. And when the police were sent to shoot them, the demonstrations grew larger. And the president of Kenya, who's basically considered in good standing with the NATO crowd, he was forced to back down and rescind the tax increases.
Wow.
I think that's really, you want to talk about symbolic, the fact that in the global south, they're now saying no more IMF policy. Now, you mentioned Europe. The biggest fight in Europe now, two biggest fights. One is on Ukraine. And the European Union just signed an agreement yesterday with Ukraine for a permanent base in Germany to support the Ukraine government against Russia, to continue the arming. They reelected Ursula von der Leyen as the president of the European Council. There's no support for her. There's no support for the bureaucrats they selected. So the EU is continuing these policies. The two areas where people are most rebellious right now, the war is one, and secondly is on the economy, the green agenda, because that's collapsing. The high prices for the so-called sustainable electricity, it's not working. The electric vehicle boom has turned into a bust. The cost of fuel, having to buy fuel from Russia that's laundered through other countries, is collapsing the industry of Germany and France and Italy and elsewhere. So there's a rebellion against the European Union with its green regulatory regime and the war policy. Now, what we saw as I said, in the European Parliament elections, when they try and pitch it as left and right and various shades of left and right, it's like the blue-red designation in the United States. It's not that at all. What we're seeing is a potential convergence of people who want to save their nations. And what they see is no leadership in the West, and they see Putin as someone who actually is organizing popular support around the traditional vision of Russian culture. And not woke Russian culture, but traditional Russian culture. And that's why Putin is popular. That's why we're seeing the so-called populism of Viktor Orban in Hungary, Vučić in Serbia, who was really ripe to be plucked for the EU and NATO, except they insisted on stealing the lithium from Serbia. And all of a sudden, he's warning of the danger of war. You had Fico from Slovakia, who was shot. And he was shot. He's on the same Ukrainian hit list that I'm on. So I think we're seeing, as I said, a shift in the terrain in Europe. It's not consolidated yet. You still have Scholz as the chancellor here, Baerbock and Habeck as the leading figures from the Greens. Macron, it's not clear what's going to happen to him. I think he'll probably maintain a certain amount of, he's president for another 2 years or 3 years, but the question is, will the National Assembly be taken away from him? And I think if there's a split vote between the so-called left and the right, the Pen crowd, that Macron will be able to navigate between it. But if one of them, especially I'm thinking that Le Pen will probably get a larger vote, that will pretty much force a no confidence vote in Macron at some point in the near future. Then, of course, you have the situation in the United Kingdom where the Tories may cease to exist and Labour isn't much better. So you have, again, a left-right situation. George Galloway and his new Workers' Party and Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party. The standard political analysis doesn't function. What only functions is the idea of people who need sovereign states that defend their interests. And we need to make sure that people who are getting elected understand that that's what this rebellion is about, not left, right, socialist, communist versus right-wing fascism. So we're rewriting the political handbook.
Yeah, exactly. Harley, what else is on your radar that you're tracking right now? And how's the rhetoric on World War III in terms of the population? Do they fear this? Is there a pushback even in the political class? I mean, we see Nigel Farage surging in the polls in the UK with his new run. What's your take on all of this, Harley?
Well, the attack, using the ATACMS missiles to hit the beach in Crimea, was somewhat of a wake-up call for some people. And I think Scott Ritter put it best. He said, what do you think would happen if Russia gave their hypersonic missiles to Cuba and the Cubans used them to hit a beach in Miami during holiday, July 4th, for example? Sure. So I think some of that is seeping through, but it's still not enough yet. The place where I think there's the most clarity is in Russia, China, Brazil, India, the global South as a whole. Yeah. We're just beginning to wake up in the West. And, I've been banging this drum for years to try and get people to recognize that the rules that they believe are those of the rules-based order are the rules of the corporate cartels, and you're a sucker if you live by them, because the people who promote the rules-based order break the rules whenever they want to. Now, the other thing I'm looking at, which I think is extremely significant, is the decision to release Julian Assange. And what I'm hearing is that there was a panic in the Biden team that if Assange were brought to the United States for trial, that this would be would lead to a rebellion of young people who see Assange as a bit of a hero. Secondly, the deeper issue here is that if you prosecute and persecute journalists who present an alternative to what's in the mainstream media, will there be journalists who will rebel? Now, so far, the Western journalists have been stinking cowards, and even worse. They've bought the line that Assange committed a crime. I was just reviewing some of the papers today, some of the documents I have over the past, collected in the past 4 years on the Assange case, and I'd forgotten about this. But do you remember Mike Pompeo was called in before a Spanish court because he was organizing an assassination of Assange?
I remember that.
And it was through a Spanish private security agency that had connections to Sheldon Adelson, the Zionist fundraiser in the United States, and that they were providing video of what was going on in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Yeah. Right.
And Pompeo said, well, we have to kill this guy. Now, you think about the fact that Donald Trump could have pardoned Assange, but it was actually May 9, 2019 under the Trump Justice Department, that the indictment, the new indictment against Assange, was done that insisted he has to be extradited. So again, you see something which is quite interesting, and I think if people get a sense of what Assange did, that on the one side, what he was doing is journalism. You get sources and you tell what the sources tell you. That happens every single day. Why is that criminal when he does it? Well, it's because he was doing it against the narrative coming out of the intelligence community, the military, and the executive branch.
Sure.
So this raises the whole question of who's really credible.
Yeah.
And when you see Biden fumbling the way he fumbled, and you get the picture in the background of Assange alone in a sense, but with support from all over the world, standing up against this war machine, it does give you, again, a sign of hope. And so I'm not trying to sell people on hopium here, but if people really think through what the fight has been over the last 30 years, we can win this. And we can win it because the other side is stupid and greedy, and they won't back off the commitment to defend their collapsing order. And that's the best news I can give people.
Very well said, Harley. Very well said. Folks, I want to thank you all for listening in. And Harley, I want to thank you for coming on board and sharing this with us. And again, folks, you can find Harley over at LaRoucheOrganization.com, LaRoucheOrganization.com, as well as SchillerInstitute.com, SchillerInstitute.com. And with that being said, folks, we are over and out. Enjoy your weekend.